One law, one nation, 1 century of silence finally shattered. For generations, the people of Burkina Faso lived on soil they worked, inherited, and protected, yet rarely owned. Fields passed through calloused hands, but the signatures of ownership belonged elsewhere. To distant investors, to powerful families, to agreements written far from the villages that depended on them. It was a paradox carved into the landscape itself. A land rich in history, yet governed by rules that placed its people last. Then came a moment that cut through the noise. On the 5th of February 2025, Minister of the Economy and Finances Aboubakar Nacanabo stood before the nation and declared that every inch of land, every field, every forest, every river would now belong to the state. Not to be sold, not to be traded, not to be locked behind titles or distant corporate portfolios. Instead, to be held in trust for the citizens who rely on it. A guardian system, not a marketplace. A correction to a pattern that had shaped more than 100 years of quiet loss. It was a decision that startled the world, not because it was loud, but because it was honest. It challenged an old global logic, one in which land was a commodity first and a lifeline second. And it forced a new question. If the soil beneath a nation is restored to its people, what future does that unlock? Stay with us. This is more than a headline. It is a hinge in history. If this story resonates with your sense of justice, do not leave. Like this video, comment your thoughts, and subscribe, not for us, but to keep the flame of dignity burning. Because what comes next is not just policy. It is the story of a people rediscovering the ground beneath their feet. For more than a century, a quiet erosion unfolded across the African continent. Not the erosion of soil, but of ownership. An erosion measured not in rainfall or seasons, but in contracts, concessions, and signatures that traveled farther than the people they affected. In Burkina Faso, this erosion shaped the lives of millions. Families tended land without ever holding deeds. Villages expanded only to be pushed back by mining zones approved far away. Farmers planted seeds on soil that could be taken without warning. And year after year, the map changed in ways most citizens never chose. It did not happen through war. It did not happen through violent conquest. It happened through paperwork, through clauses written in languages many villagers did not speak, through deals exchanged behind closed doors where the price of land was calculated without counting the people living upon it. For decades, foreign investors acquired vast territories for export farming, luxury tourism, industrial mining, or long-term speculation. Local elites followed the same path, accumulating thousands of hectares while ordinary citizens struggled for small, insecure plots. The result was a nation of workers without ownership, communities without protection, and a landscape whose future was shaped by those who would never live on it. It was a wound carried quietly, passed from one generation to the next. But there was a memory that refused to die, a memory of a time when things were different. In 1984, a young leader named Thomas Sankara rose to power in Burkina Faso. He was not like the others. He wore simple uniforms. He rode a bicycle. He spoke of dignity, sovereignty, and justice. And he did something radical. He nationalized the land. Sankara believed that land should not be a commodity. It should not be hoarded by the few while the many went without. He declared that all land belonged to the state, held in trust for the people. For 3 years, his reforms gave farmers security, gave women access, gave communities hope. Then, on the 15th of October 1987, Thomas Sankara was assassinated. The reforms were reversed. The land fell back into the hands of elites and foreign corporations. The wound reopened. And for nearly 40 years, the people of Burkina Faso watched as the soil beneath their feet slipped further from their grasp. Until another young leader emerged. Ibrahim Traoré did not speak of himself as a savior. He spoke of continuation. He spoke of Sankara's legacy as unfinished work. And on the 5th of February 2025, his government did what many thought impossible. They reclaimed the land. Minister Aboubakar Nacanabo announced that all land in Burkina Faso, from the most remote village to the busiest town, would become the property of the state. Not a state acting as a buyer, not a state acting as a seller, a state acting as custodian. A guardian of the national inheritance, holding the soil in trust for every citizen, regardless of wealth, lineage, or influence. Under this reform, no individual may claim permanent ownership. No corporation may buy vast estates. No foreign government may secure exclusive rights to land. The logic is simple. Land should serve those who depend on it, not those who see it as a financial asset. This shift was not an act of hostility. It was an attempt to correct a structural imbalance, a recognition that the old model had created layers of inequality between foreign corporations and local communities, between elites and small farmers, between those with documents and those with only hope. The reform echoed a deeper truth, long felt but rarely spoken, that land is identity, land is security, land is future. And when the ground beneath a nation becomes a commodity traded away, dignity becomes fragile. For Traoré, the reform was not about accumulating power, but about redistributing it, away from those who held it in excess and toward those who needed it to survive. Yet even this statement sparked debate worldwide. Critics argued it was too radical. Supporters argued it was long overdue. And citizens, many of whom had lived in uncertainty for years, felt a sense of relief that could not easily be measured on a balance sheet. But passing a law is only one step. The soil still needed to be transformed from a legal category into a living promise. And the world still wondered what would happen when a nation reclaimed the very foundation of its existence. Because a law, no matter how bold, is only the seed. The real story begins when a nation decides what to grow from it. At this point, I want to invite you into something bigger than watching. Leave a thank you in the comments. It might be "Thank you, Traoré," or "Thank you, Burkina Faso," or simply "Thank you for hope." Why? Because each thank you carries weight. Each thank you says, I hear this, I feel this, I stand with this. Imagine hundreds of people adding their thanks. It turns a video into a movement. So write your thank you now and let your voice be part of this shared journey. Before the reform, land in Burkina Faso followed a quiet but relentless logic. Whoever had money, influence, or the right connections gained access. Everyone else waited, hoped, or fought small battles they rarely won. Land was not a home, it was a market stall. And in that marketplace, the price kept rising while security kept shrinking. The old system created its own kind of regret, a slow, lingering disappointment that lived in the stories of ordinary people. A farmer could work the same field for 30 years, yet lose it overnight because someone arrived with a document stamped in an office he had never visited. A mother could build a home on ancestral soil only to discover that the land had been promised to a developer. A village could wake up to survey markers signaling an upcoming project that would not employ its residents, feed its children, or protect its rivers. This was not chaos, it was structure. A structure built on the assumption that land should be owned by those who could purchase it, not by those who relied upon it. The consequences were predictable: evictions, disputes, costly lawsuits, and families forced to rent the very soil their grandparents once cultivated freely.
And beneath all these tensions lay a deeper ache, the knowledge that the land beneath one's feet was never truly safe. Then came June 2023. The government passed a law that sent a clear signal. Private real estate developers were excluded from urban planning operations. Any private entity seeking to hold urban land was limited to 5 hectares, no more, no exceptions. The law had a single purpose: to prevent land grabbing and speculation, and to increase mass access to Burkina Faso's land. It was the first tremor before the earthquake. The new model sought to break the cycle completely by making the state the custodian of all land. The reform removed the profit motive from land ownership. No more selling to the highest bidder, no more quiet accumulation by elites, no more transfers of vast territories to foreign entities. Instead, land would be allocated based on need, purpose, and national interest, criteria designed to support communities, not corporations. This change did more than shift legal definitions, it shifted psychological ground. Land held by the state is harder to steal, harder to manipulate, harder to bend toward private agendas. When no individual owns the soil outright, corruption finds fewer entry points. Boundaries become clearer, disputes become fewer, and the inheritance of a nation becomes something protected collectively rather than guarded privately. It also transformed national planning. Under the old system, building a road meant negotiating with numerous private landowners, some cooperative, others not. Constructing schools or clinics required compensation battles that could drag on for years. Developing infrastructure felt like moving through a maze, one built not from walls but from deeds. The new model opened those pathways. With the state as custodian, strategic development no longer dependent on the willingness of landowners.
Planning became a question of purpose, not permission. Roads could connect remote communities. Irrigation systems could be expanded without obstruction. Renewable energy grids could be designed for the entire population, not only for those who could afford to negotiate. Yet the emotional core of this reform is not efficiency. It is dignity. There is dignity in knowing that your home cannot be sold from beneath you. There is dignity in planting seeds without fearing uprooting. There is dignity in teaching children on land protected by law, not by luck. In a world where millions still live with fragile access to the soil that feeds them, dignity itself becomes a form of security. But a question lingered, whispered across villages and towns. If the state now held all land, who would it give access to first? Farmers, women, youth, private businesses, cooperatives, and on what terms? The answer would shape the nation's future and decide whether the reform was merely symbolic or truly transformative. Because land without people is barren, but people without land are powerless. And so, the nation stepped into its most delicate chapter, deciding not just who held the land, but who could build a future upon it. If reclaiming the land was the first step, redistributing it with purpose was the second, and the far more complex one. A nation can take back its soil in a moment, but deciding how to place it back into the hands of its people requires patience, courage, and clarity. Burkina Faso called this new era Phase 2, a phase not defined by ownership, but by opportunity. For decades, countless farmers lived in a paradox. They were the backbone of the nation's food supply, yet many did not have secure rights to the fields they tended. They rented small plots from landlords or foreign companies. They lived with a quiet fear that at the end of any season, their land could be reassigned, reclaimed, or sold. This fear sank into their routines. It shaped how much they invested, how much they planted, and how much hope they dared to hold. Under Phase 2, the first group to receive guaranteed access was these small farmers. The state offered them land, not as compensation, but as recognition. With stable rights came training in irrigation, soil regeneration, crop rotation, climate-smart practices, and improved seeds.
Tractors replaced hand tools in some regions. Shared equipment centers appeared in others. Farmers were no longer planting for survival. They were planting for continuity, for a harvest strengthened by knowledge, not weakened by uncertainty. Then came another transformation, one long overdue. Women who formed the backbone of agricultural labor in much of Africa now received collective access to land through cooperatives. In the old system, many women worked fields they could never claim. Their labor sustained households without granting them authority over the soil. Phase 2 acknowledged what had always been true. When women hold land, communities stabilize, nutrition improves, income diversifies, children stay in school longer, villages gain resilience. Women's groups were granted territories for farming, livestock rearing, shea processing, food preservation, and market gardening, sectors where they had always excelled but rarely controlled. And then there were the young. Half of Burkina Faso's population is under the age of 17, a statistic often framed as a burden. But here, it became an asset. For years, rural youth migrated to cities hoping for work, only to find crowded streets and limited opportunities. Phase 2 changed that trajectory. With land designated for youth-led projects, a new wave of rural entrepreneurship began. Solar drying centers, seed development labs, small irrigation networks, community storage hubs, agricultural startups. Training academies appeared where abandoned fields once stood. Land was no longer a reason to leave. It became a reason to return. For Burkina Faso, this redistribution was not charity. It was structural justice. It restored balance to a system where too many had too little and too few had too much. And it redefined what sovereignty could mean when it touched the daily lives of ordinary citizens. As these changes unfolded, something else happened, something that revealed the emotional texture of the reform. Confidence grew. Farmers planned further than the next season. Women formed new cooperatives. Youth saw futures that did not require migration. Communities began discussing not only how to use the land, but how to protect it, enrich it, and pass it forward. A nation that had long been told to depend on external actors began to trust its own capacity. And now, before moving forward, let us turn this moment into something shared. Pause for a moment and share with us where you are watching this video. Is it from Africa, from Europe, from the Americas, or from a small village whose name deserves to be spoken aloud? Tell us, because every place matters.
One Nation Africa will read them with gratitude, and we send to each of you a heartfelt wish. May your journey be filled with dignity, hope, and light. This is more than a video. It is a gathering of voices across the globe. These reforms marked a turning point, but they also raised a pressing question. Land could nourish communities, but could it strengthen the economy? Could Burkina Faso transform fields into factories, raw crops into finished goods, and promise into prosperity? The answer would come in the next chapter, one that demanded discipline, innovation, and a new understanding of partnership. Because land can feed a family, but industry can feed a nation. And Burkina Faso was ready to take that step. Land on its own offers survival, but when paired with industry, it offers transformation. And that is where Burkina Faso turned next, from reclaiming the soil to reshaping the economy it sustains. For decades, the country faced a familiar trap, exporting raw materials only to import the finished products at far higher prices. Cotton might be grown locally, yet shirts were imported. Tomatoes were harvested in abundance, yet tomato paste arrived from thousands of miles away. Shea nuts filled baskets, yet shea butter returned in foreign bottles with foreign labels. The pattern was predictable. Value left the country while dependency deepened. It was a cycle repeated across the continent, one that drained resources slowly but relentlessly. The new reform aimed to break that cycle.
Under the revised system, land designated for industrial zones gave priority to local businesses or regional African partners rather than foreign monopolies. The logic behind this shift is straightforward. When value is added at home, jobs remain at home. When processing happens locally, profits circulate within communities. And when industries grow domestically, economic resilience strengthens. Factories for rice milling, fruit processing, cotton spinning, grain storage, dairy production, and shea transformation began to find their place. They did not appear overnight, nor did they solve every economic challenge. But they marked a change in direction, a deliberate move away from a model where the nation's wealth was extracted rather than expanded. Yet the most significant economic shift came from beneath the ground. Gold. Burkina Faso sits atop some of Africa's richest gold deposits. For years, foreign corporations extracted it, refined it abroad, and sold it on international markets. The profits flowed outward. The people remained poor. Then, in a move that stunned investors, the government nationalized 2 gold mines previously owned by a London-listed firm. They established national gold reserves valued at $80 million. And they built something the nation had never possessed, a domestic gold refinery capable of processing 150 tons annually. No more exporting unrefined gold to Europe, no more watching wealth disappear across borders. As part of what Ibrahim Traoré calls a revolution to ensure Burkina Faso benefits from its mineral wealth, the state now controls the entire chain, from extraction to refinement to sale. It was a statement, not of isolation, but of independence. Yet this industrial shift was not a rejection of foreign investment. It was a recalibration. Investors could still operate in Burkina Faso, but under new terms. They could no longer purchase vast areas of land permanently. Instead, they applied for long-term leases managed by the state. These leases required alignment with national priorities, food security, employment, environmental protection, and local development. Projects that served only external markets without local benefit were no longer accepted. This approach created a different kind of partnership, one grounded in transparency and mutual respect. Investors were encouraged to work with local communities, hire local workers, and contribute to domestic industries. In return, they gained stability, clear rules, and a government willing to support legitimate projects. But the most significant change was environmental and ethical. With the state controlling land allocations, companies could no longer clear forests without oversight, divert rivers without consequence, or exploit soil without accountability. The custodian model gave the state the authority to revoke leases if environmental standards were violated. For the first time in many regions, land had a protector powerful enough to defend it against irresponsible extraction. As local industries grew and partnerships improved, a subtle shift began to take shape in the national mindset. People no longer viewed development as something delivered from abroad. They began to see it as something built at home through discipline, innovation, and cooperation. The road to sovereignty, after all, is not paved with speeches.
It is paved with workshops, processing plants, storage facilities, research centers, and skilled hands shaping raw materials into products of value. But as Burkina Faso strengthened its economic foundations, something else stirred beyond its borders. A reaction from older powers accustomed to a very different relationship with the continent. Because when a nation learns to stand, those who once expected it to kneel begin to take notice. As the reforms took shape, the world reacted, some with curiosity, others with caution, and a few with unmistakable fear. It was a familiar pattern, one that had played out across Africa whenever a nation chose to redraw the lines of its own destiny. Critics in foreign capitals labeled the land policy reckless, anti-investor, destabilizing. Analysts predicted economic collapse. Some corporations paused operations, waiting to see whether the new rules could be softened or reversed. Reports circulated warning of isolation, downturns, and political risk. But beneath these predictions lay a quieter, deeper concern. A nation asserting control over its land challenges a long-standing system. For decades, external powers benefited from access to African resources at low cost and minimal resistance. A change in that arrangement meant a change in the balance of influence. Yet the warnings did not unfold as predicted. Instead of collapsing, Burkina Faso adapted. Food production began to improve. Local industries expanded. Regional partnerships, once treated as secondary, grew stronger. Nations in West Africa expressed support. Conversations in universities, villages, and digital spaces spread across the continent. People began asking whether this model could work elsewhere, whether sovereignty could be built from soil upward. And something remarkable happened. Sanctions, once seen as the ultimate instrument of pressure, began to lose their force. Sanctions can restrict money. They can slow commerce, but they cannot stop a nation that has decided to rely on itself. When dependence shrinks, so does vulnerability. When a country builds food security, strengthens local production, and diversifies its alliances, outside punishment loses its power. In an increasingly multipolar world, no nation stands alone unless it chooses to. Across Africa, the narrative began to shift. What was once framed as risk became an example. What was once criticized as radical became a symbol of courage. Citizens in neighboring states debated similar reforms. Regional unions explored deeper cooperation. A continental confidence, quiet at first, then louder, started to rise. On the 30th of April 2025, thousands gathered in the capital city of Ouagadougou. They carried banners, they chanted slogans, they sang songs of independence, and they shouted one phrase over and over: "Long live Traoré!" It was not a cult of personality. It was a recognition that a path had been opened, a path that others could walk. Ibrahim Traoré himself spoke that day. His words were simple but clear. Together, in solidarity, we will defeat imperialism and neocolonialism for a free, dignified, and sovereign Africa. The crowd roared, not because of the man, but because of the message. Because the message said what millions had felt but rarely heard spoken aloud: that Africa does not need permission to reclaim its dignity. It needs only the courage to act. Yet the most significant shift did not occur in government offices or foreign press briefings. It occurred among the people themselves. Farmers returned to their fields with certainty. Women expanded cooperatives that had long relied on borrowed land. Youth began to innovate, invest, and build. Trust in national institutions, fragile for years, experienced a slow but real revival. Communities spoke of a future shaped collectively rather than dictated externally. The people were no longer waiting for change, they were participating in it. Because the most powerful force behind any reform is not the law that enacts it, but the citizens who give it life. A policy can be written by a government, but a movement is carried by hands. Hands that plant, build, protect, and pass forward what they believe is worth keeping. And in this moment, a new question emerged, not from critics abroad, but from voices at home. If land can be reclaimed, protected, and shared, what else can be rebuilt? What other parts of national life can be anchored in dignity, fairness, and sovereignty? It was a question that pointed not to conflict, but to possibility. As we prepare to end, remember this: what you have just heard is not the end of the road, but a seed planted in the soil of your heart.
Every story of dignity, every voice of sovereignty is part of a harvest that lies ahead. If you want to see that harvest grow, subscribe. Let this channel be the road we walk together, the light we carry forward. Your subscription is not for us alone. It is for the promise of what is still to come. Join us
And be ready for the next chapter that is already waiting to be written. As the dust settles on this new era, something becomes clear. What happened in Burkina Faso is not an isolated decision. It is a signal that the foundations of power are shifting, that the meaning of ownership is being rewritten, and that the future of a nation can change when its people reclaim the ground they stand upon. For many years, land was treated as an external asset, a commodity traded across borders and boardrooms. Now it has returned to what it always was, a living inheritance. Not an object to be sold, but a trust to be protected. Not a prize for the wealthy, but a foundation for the many. And in that shift lies the beginning of a different kind of independence, one that is not declared but lived. It is the rediscovery of something older, deeper, and more enduring, the bond between a people and the land that shapes their lives. It is the recognition that sovereignty begins beneath one's feet, that dignity grows from the soil upward, and that a nation's future is strongest when it is rooted in its own hands. It is important to note that this transformation was not shaped by any single figure alone. Yet, the decisions taken during the tenure of Ibrahim Traoré played a role in reminding citizens that sovereignty can be practical, not theoretical. His name appears in debates, in discussions, and in the reflections of those trying to understand how a young nation found the confidence to challenge old patterns. But the heart of this story is not about one leader. It is about the millions who now walk their land with renewed certainty. Across fields, cooperatives, training centers, and newly built industries, people speak with a quiet assurance, a sense that the years ahead may be difficult, but they are theirs. This is not the pride of victory. It is the pride of belonging. And belonging is the first step of every revolution that endures. The soil beneath Burkina Faso carries marks of its past, both the wounds and the resilience. Today, it also carries the imprint of a new beginning. With land held in trust, industries growing, and citizens participating in the reshaping of their future, Burkina Faso steps into a chapter defined not by dependency, but by determination. As regional alliances strengthen and old pressures loosen their grip, the continent watches closely. Some see risk, others see possibility. But those who walk the fields, who build the businesses, who raise the children on this land, they see something else entirely. A path. A long, winding path carved by choice, sacrifice, and hope. A path that asks not for perfection, but for perseverance. In the years to come, historians may debate the impact of Ibrahim Traoré or the exact moment when the balance shifted. But what cannot be debated is the truth unfolding now, that the people of Burkina Faso have reclaimed their right to decide their destiny. And in the end, sovereignty is exactly that, the freedom to shape tomorrow with one's own hands. The soil remembers who it belongs to, and at last the people stand firmly upon it.